Okay, it's time for a little walkthrough of this brother machine. It's a CS-6000i. If you have this machine, this might be helpful. So, the first thing I notice about this machine is that it is a top drop-in bobbin system down here. So a lot of different machines, you either put the bobbin in the front of the machine facing in, from the side, and this one happens to be from the top. So they call this top drop-in bobbin. And I guess we can focus there first because it's the area you're going to be using the most probably. So it has a clear cover over the bobbin, and to access that you just pull back this little plastic tab here and it releases this end. The other end is underneath this little spring area. Just take it out. Now, the next thing that's cool about these brother machines and baby lock machines are that they started doing this split needle plate system where you have a metal needle plate that's locked down with these two screws, and then you have this slide plate, this plastic slide plate, and the way you remove it is put your finger back here in this indentation and just push towards you and it pops right out. And that'll just give you really good quick access into the bobbin case hook area. Alright, so the black piece in the middle is your bobbin case. That's where your bobbin thread is going to be located. The way to get this out, the easiest way, is to just take your index finger, stick it in there, and just pick it out like that. Alright, so this is your hook area. As you turn your hand wheel toward you, you'll see the hook rotates around and the needle goes up and down. And there's a little track here, like a step down. That's where your bobbin case is going to sit. Okay. If you notice on the bobbin case, there is a little white mark on it, and that corresponds with a little white dot over here, and they put that on there just to help you line up your bobbin case, but I don't really think that's enough. I think that's great to help, but I think you kind of want to understand why you're doing it. So if you look at the bobbin case, if it'll come in focus here for me, there's a bump right here. This little bump is the area where thread passes through here very rapidly as it forms stitches. That little bump should be on the left-hand side of this flat spring here, which it's springy. So when putting this in, you just want to make sure you put it down on that track and that bump is pushed against that flat spring. You can see the arrow pointing toward the dot. Just rock it back and forth. It should have that movement because the thread has to pass through that area. Alright, and that's how you know it's in right. It's a really good idea, to clean this area out, and that's why they make it so easy. Alright, these two screws, you're using nickel. It's probably with a brother machine or baby lock, I would use a nickel. It's probably the best screwdriver you can ever get for these machines. It fits perfectly in these needle plate screws. It fits perfectly in your presser foot holder screw on the presser bar, and it also usually fits perfectly in your needle clamp screw here. It holds your needle in place. So I usually have a bunch of nickels laying around because it is by far the best screwdriver for the job. Alright, so let's put that back in. Take our slide plate, and you can see there's the little square holes, and they correspond to these little tabs that stick down. So you just kind of drop it in there and then push it toward the back, and it should snap into place nicely. Alright, now if we want to put a bobbin in, you can see that the bobbin on these machines is very important to put your bobbin in correctly. right? So if you see, the bobbin thread is coming off of the right side of the bobbin. But if we flip the bobbin upside down, then it's coming off the left side. So they give you a little diagram here. And you can see that in the diagram, the thread is coming off the left side of the bobbin. Okay, so it's shaped more like a P, like this, instead of a Q, which would be if it came over here. So you want to put it in that way. And the reason is just that the thread will reverse direction, and it will take up any slack. You don't want slack in your bobbin thread. Now, there's a track here that goes all the way around to here, and then there's a blade here that cuts off your thread. What this is doing is just helping you getting your bobbin thread into the bobbin tension, which is down here. These plates, you're basically squeezing it between these two plates, and it puts drag on that thread, and it squeezes on the thread, and that's what creates your lower tension. So you would start by taking that back out, making sure your slide plate is secure. Always put this plate on first, your metal plate. Make sure it's very snug with these two screws. You should take it off to clean inside the feed dogs because lint builds up there. So you take this off, you clean underneath with a brush, pulling things out. Don't use air and blow stuff into your gears. Pull your lint out and lock down these screws. Then put your slide plate on. Then put your bobbin in the shape of a P. Then pull it through this track. And what that's going to do is deposit the thread where it should be. And then on these, it's really nice. It just trims off. And now it's where you need the thread to be, and you can put your little clear window and lock it down. Alright, so that's pretty much what you need to know for that area. If we look at the rest of the machine, up top, this is where you would wind your bobbin. Okay. This is the bobbin winder stand. And these little slots that are in here have blades in them, and it's for cutting off thread. This is your bobbin winder stop. You can see it's kind of offset, like kind of egg-shaped, with the screw in the middle. This is what determines how much thread is going to be wound on your bobbin. Okay? So if we take that same bobbin and put it up here, you push it to the right. If you look, this stopper is not going to allow very much thread to be wound on here, see? It goes inside of the bobbin. It's pretty much, that's about the amount it's going to let you wind. So if you need to adjust that at all, you just loosen this screw and you rotate this and then then tighten the screw up again, and you can control how much thread is actually wound onto that bobbin. That's for you to control. Don't loosen this too much, just enough to turn it, because you don't want the internal nut to fall out. But that's how you control how much that is. A lot of people bring their machine in because they're like, oh, it's not winding enough. Well, you're in control of that with this machine. You can do that. So just a little simple mechanical adjustment. Your spool pin is back here. This is where you'll put your top thread. This just pulls straight up, and it can be put down for protection while it's being stored somewhere or when you're transporting it. So that's a really nice feature. Take that little plastic off. What's really important about these that you probably want to make sure that you do, depending on the size of your spool, you want to use a little felt disc like this. What that's going to do is reduce the amount of friction. When you put a spool on, it's going to turn really smoothly, and it's not going to rub up against here and make all kinds of marks, and you can get all kinds of friction and uneven stitches. This will alleviate all of that. So this is kind of a small one. You can use that for smaller spools. You can even use it for this spool. But if you want, and you're using a little bit bigger spools, you could put a bigger one like that on. You can either, they're kind of thick, so, and they're usually pretty cheap. You can get them many different places. You can also, you can also cut your own, I guess, too, with some thicker felt. So It's always a good idea to have that with any of these, that where you're pulling your thread from the side like this and the spool is spinning. A lot of other ways to set up your thread, that's not the case. But with these, it's always great to have a felt disc underneath. Now, if we're going to wind a bobbin, the thread will come over. If you look at this diagram, they give you two examples. They give you, this is for threading your machine to sew, and then this one over here is a diagram for winding. So what you'll notice here in those diagrams is this button, which is this right here. It's actually a little spring-loaded button, and you want to bring your thread underneath it. That's what creates some drag, some pre-tension for your winding. So as you can see, you go along the front side of it and loop around and go this way. So what that looks like is you take it, you put it underneath, you make sure that it gets underneath there, and you feel, when you're pulling on that thread, you feel that you have to put a little force to pull it. Alright. Now I already have thread on here, so I'm not actually going to wind something, but I can show you what needs to be done. You never want to put thread on top of thread. So you always want to have an empty bobbin. In this machine, this brother, CS-6000i, takes what's called a 15 class bobbin. And you don't want to use any other style bobbin in this machine. It can cause damage. It'll cause poor sewing. It has to be this tall. It has to be this wide. Don't put metal ones. Just plastic 15 class bobbins. That's what you use for this machine. Okay? So there's another diagram over here, and it essentially shows you what you need to do to set it up. So the dotted line is the thread. It comes up the back side of the bobbin, and you wind it around a few times, and then come over and cut it off in this little slot that has a blade inside of it, and that'll hold it in place while you're winding. Now, the other thing that I mentioned earlier about that stop, notice that stop. And you see how the fat lobe is actually down here, and this one's way over here? Somebody's really set this thing, so it'll only wind a tiny amount. It's going to look something more like this when you've got it in use. And obviously you could turn it enough to where the thread will actually come off the bobbin. You want to make sure that when you wind, you only wind to about right where my nail is. Like, you want to give it a little bit of room inside. So you can adjust this stopper to do that for you. So anyway, the thread will come up here. It comes to the back side, and you wind it around a few times, and then you come down into that notch, and it'll just trim off like that and hold it in place. And then you're going to push it to the right, and now it's engaged and ready to go. So I'm only going to put a tiny amount just so you can see, because I don't want to wind on top of that thread. But then you would come down to here and just hit this, and you see it would start to wind up your bobbin. And that's what you want. If ever the bobbin thread is loose on your bobbin, you know, it's not tightly wound evenly top to bottom, and it's loose. The loose means that it has come out of your pre-tension button here, and no longer has drag, and so that it's just floppy loose wrapping on here, and you want to take that off. You don't want to use that in the machine. You want to make sure that it is in there correctly. I see that quite often. The other thing I'll see is that when it winds, it doesn't wind evenly top to bottom. In other words, there'll be more thread on the bottom half and less on the top. So instead of it being even like this, it'll actually be like this. So there'll be less wound up top, like that. And the height of this controls that. So if this thing is up higher than it should be, there's going to be more thread up top. So it'll be like that. If this is this frame is lower than it should be, then there'll be more thread on the bottom. You want this at just the right height so that it winds evenly from top to bottom. So when it's winding, it does this and winds it evenly. And you can adjust that. They make it really easy. Right on the back, there's a screw right here, and you can lift this up and down. Do small increments. Test it out. Make it perfect before you start a project and you're using your good thread. Use some junk thread to test it out. Because, thread is only good for, after like 3 years it starts to degrade a little bit. So, if you got cheap thread that you came upon or happened upon, or just some old thread, use it for things like that. Use it for calibrating your machine and getting it set up. Okay, next things. I guess we could look over on this side. There's not much here. You've got your power cord. You always want to make sure you use the power cord that came with it. Don't go using different ones and jam it in there. This one specifically has a flat side and a round side on that plug. That's the style that fits in there. Use that. And there's your power switch. This machine doesn't have anything else really over here, some do. Here's the listing of all your stitches. And it's very obvious on the front of the machine. Each has a number and you can dial that number in. You dial that number in here. And you can dial that in. You increase the tens column here. It's pretty self-explanatory. Increase the ones column here, and it will change to the different stitches. Okay? Over on this side, you have your stitch length and your stitch width. So stitch length is, let's say you're doing a straight stitch, right? And the stitches go like this. If you have a very short stitch, it's going to be like this. If your stitch length is long, it's like that. And it's the same thing with width. Let's say you have like this. If you have a really small width, it's going to do this. If you have a big width, it's going to do that. That's pretty straightforward. But if you're not familiar with it, you might not understand why or how to control that. So, you've got, say, this zigzag. You could make it really narrow, or you can make it really wide on this stitch. Depending on what job you're doing or trying to achieve. Same with any of these. You can control these and how they look. Over here, this is your speed. So this is kind of like a governor on a car, where you have a car that is a rental or something, and it will only let you go up to 60 miles an hour. You can't go any faster than that. That's what this does. So if you are new to sewing, or you want it to only go so fast for an operation, you can set what the top speed is here. So let's say you set it just in the middle, and you push down the foot control, the pedal. When it's all the way down, it's only going to go half speed. You can set it down really low, so when you put the pedal down all the way, it's just going to sew really slowly. Okay? And that's good for beginning sewing, learning how to do that. Or if you're going through very tough multiple layers and you're trying to just navigate over so that you're not skipping and you're not pushing your needle or anything like that. And then, if you're just doing some thin layers and stuff, you could put it right up, and then you'll be able to control on the foot control how fast. But when you put it all the way down, it'll go up to full speed. So this is a really good governing system for the speed of the motor of the machine. This is your needle up-down button. This will move your needle up and needle down. Okay? And, another video will explain why you would want to do that. But at least you know what they do. This reverse button here actually makes the feed dogs run backwards for a period of time. You don't want to do it for very long distance, but you do it for a very short distance at the beginning of your stitch and at the end of your stitch, just to lock your stitches down so they don't slip out of the fabric. Okay, so you reverse direction, and that'll lock it into the fabric, and that's why you would use something like this. You don't want to run your machine backwards for any distance. If you want to go a distance, you just turn the fabric around. So this is just for short distance, just for locking things down. This button is essentially the foot control. So instead of having a foot control on the floor, you can use this, and it will start and stop the machine. Okay, start and stop button. This up top is your upper tension. There are little metal plates in here that the thread goes in between when it drops in here, and it squeezes on the thread. Kind of like your pretension, it creates a drag. Or down in the bobbin area, where you put it between the plates there, that creates a drag for the thread, and that's what tension is. Okay, so it's a tug of war between the upper and the lower, and when you're sewing, neither one of them should win the tug of war. So the thread will lock together inside of the fabric. It won't be pulled to one side or the other, and that's the balance you have to create between these two, and that's what forms a good stitch. Okay? Typically, tensions are set on 4, but you can adjust it either way because different threads will create different tensions. It's always good to use the same type of thread, top and bottom, to create that easy balance. But if for some reason you needed to use different types of thread, different weights of thread, top and bottom, you may need to adjust this to balance it out. And it's always a good idea to test it on the material you're going to be using beforehand and find that balance. But then always bring it back to 4, because that's typically where it's going to work the best, and that's where a technician will calibrate it to, is number 4. The last thing I think we have, well, over on the side actually here, there's a little blade over here, and that's just for, cutting thread off. That'll cut it to the right length when you're threading down here. But that's what I'm going to talk about next. Is this machine comes with an automatic threader. A lot of them you have to do it by hand. This one is really helpful. Alright, so down here in the needle area, alright, you've got, it'd be hard to see that needle, but it's right here. The eye of the needle is right here. This little lever brings your threader down. Okay. And what's going to happen is that threader is going to rotate, and there's a tiny hook that actually goes through the eye of the needle, sticks through the eye of the needle, and pulls the thread back through. So when your thread is coming down here, when you're threading, there's a little guide. There's a little guide right above the needle. You want to make sure it gets in there. Then, when it comes down, this hook right here, alright, when you push this down, you take your fingers and get it onto that hook, rotate it forward, and there's a fork. You put it into the fork underneath the hook, and it pulls back into the needle. I'm going to try and zoom in so you can see that closer. Alright, hopefully this is a little bit easier to see. It comes down, you put the thread on there. Now you can see that right here and right here, there's a gap in between there, talking right in this area, and the piece that's in the middle right here is the hook. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it down, the hook goes through the eye, we put the thread between these two, and then under the hook, and then the hook pulls the thread back through the eye of the needle. And then you'll take the thread and pull it to the back of the machine through the eye. Like that. And that makes it a lot easier. Once you get used to that, you won't even think about it, and it's a really great feature to have on these machines. Alright, so that took a little bit longer than I expected, but we talked about a lot of things with this machine. It's a rather simple machine, but if it's one of your first machines that you own, It can be a little intimidating because if you're new to sewing, there's a lot of things to get right. So you want to make sure you get them right. And there you go. Any questions or specific comments, leave them down below. I try to address everybody if I can. And obviously if you have any requests for videos of specific models, I can try and do that as well. There's a lot of models out there, and I may or may not be able to get my hands on them, but I'll give it a shot. Alright? See you next time.